The crisp Colorado wind whipped my hair back as Zoe and I pushed our horses into a steady gallop across the open prairie. But no amount of speed could outrun the secret burning inside me. "Riley, you've barely said 2 words since we left the stables," Zoe called out, her voice cutting through the thunder of hooves, as she slowed her mare to match mine. Little did I know that this innocent horseback ride with my best friend Brynn's mother would push me to confess the one truth that threatened to shatter every bond one held dear. The sun hung low over the Rocky Mountain foothills, painting the tall grass in shades of gold and amber that made the whole landscape feel alive and unforgiving at the same time. I gripped the reins tighter, feeling the leather bite into my palms as my horse, a reliable bay gelding named Atlas, responded to my tension with a slight flick of his ears. Zoe rode beside me on her favorite chestnut mare, her posture straight and confident like someone who had spent decades on these trails. At 48, she still moved with the grace of a woman half her age, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes always seeming to see more than you wanted them to. Brynn had invited me out to the family ranch for the weekend, but last-minute work at the veterinary clinic kept her in Denver, so it was just me and Zoe for this afternoon ride. I had jumped at the chance because being around Zoe always felt safe, like stepping into a warm kitchen after a cold day. She had welcomed me into their lives since Brynn and I met in college 5 years ago, 2 nervous freshmen bonding over late-night study sessions and bad cafeteria food. Brynn, with her infectious laugh and endless energy for hiking and rescuing animals, had become my person, the one who knew all my quirks and still chose to stick around. But somewhere along the way my feelings had shifted from sisterly affection to something deeper, something that made my chest tighten every time she hugged me or brushed her hand against mine while we watched movies on the couch in our shared apartment. I had tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just closeness or admiration for her strength, but the truth clawed at me every night when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying moments like the time we got lost on a trail, and she held my hand the whole way back, whispering jokes to keep me calm. Loving another woman in our tight-knit suburban circle outside Boulder, where church potlucks and family barbecues defined life, felt like stepping off a cliff with no parachute. My own parents still asked when I would meet a nice guy, settle down, and give them grandkids, their casual comments landing like stones in my stomach. I couldn't imagine telling them the truth without seeing disappointment cloud their faces, or worse, hearing the silence that followed questions about my future. Zoe slowed her mare to a walk, and I matched her pace, letting the horses catch their breath in the cool afternoon air. She glanced over at me with that gentle smile that always made me feel seen. "You seem distracted, Riley," she said, her voice soft but probing as the wind rustled the grass around us. "Is everything okay with you and Brynn? She mentioned you two have been spending less time together lately." I swallowed hard, my throat dry despite the water bottle in my saddle bag. The words I had rehearsed 100 times in the mirror stuck on my tongue. Zoe had always been the one to offer advice without judgment, even after her divorce from Brynn's father 3 years ago, when she chose to keep the ranch and raise her daughter on her own terms. She shared stories of her youth growing up on these same lands, the dreams she had put aside for marriage and motherhood, the regrets that still lingered when the house got too quiet. "Life is too short for secrets that eat you alive, Riley," she said once during a late-night talk on her porch, swinging gently under the stars. Her words echoed in my mind now as the horses plodded along the familiar dirt path lined with wildflowers and occasional patches of sagebrush. I had come out here hoping for clarity, not this overwhelming urge to spill everything. But as the trail curved toward a small overlook where the mountains stretched out like a promise of freedom, I felt the dam break inside me. "Zoe," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "There is something I need to tell you. It's about Brynn." She turned in her saddle, her expression open and encouraging, waiting for me to continue without any hint of the storm my words would unleash. I took a deep breath, the scent of pine and earth filling my lungs, and let the truth tumble out in a rush that left me shaking. "I love her, Zoe. Not as a friend. I am in love with your daughter." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than the gathering clouds on the horizon. And for the first time since we saddled up, I wondered if I had just set fire to the only family that had ever truly felt like home. Zoe reined in her mare so abruptly that the horse tossed its head in surprise, and I pulled Atlas to a halt beside her, the sudden stillness making my confession echo louder in my ears. Her face paled for a split second, her green eyes widening as she processed what I had just said, but then she steadied herself with the same quiet strength I had always admired, the kind that came from years of holding a family together through loss and change. Riley, she breathed, her voice steady but laced with a mix of shock and something softer, concern, maybe even understanding. You love Brynn. As in you are in love with her. I nodded, my hands trembling on the reins as the wind picked up, whipping strands of hair across my face. I had never said it out loud to anyone, not even to myself in the mirror, without flinching, but here on this windswept trail with Brynn's mother staring at me, I felt both exposed and strangely relieved. The weight that had pressed on my chest for 2 years lifted just enough to let me breathe again, though I knew this was only the beginning. Zoe dismounted gracefully, tying her Mara's reins to a low branch of a nearby aspen tree, and motioned for me to do the same. We walked a few steps to the edge of the overlook where the prairie dropped away into a valley dotted with cattle and the distant sparkle of a stream. She did not speak at first, just stood there, arms crossed, gazing out at the landscape that had shaped her life the same way it was shaping mine in this moment. I have suspected something for a while, she admitted, finally turning to face me, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. The way you look at her when you think no one is watching, the way you light up when she walks into a room. But hearing it from you like this, it changes things, Riley. Changes everything. My heart raced as I waited for the rejection, the lecture about how this could ruin Brynn's life or tear apart our friendship, but instead Zoe reached out and squeezed my shoulder, her touch warm and grounding. Tell me more, she said, guiding me to sit on a flat rock where the sun warmed the stone. How long have you felt this way? What made you decide to tell me now, of all places? The questions poured out of me then in a flood of memories and fears. The first time I realized my feelings during a rain-soaked camping trip when Brynn had shared her blanket, and we talked until dawn about dreams and futures. The nights I cried alone in my room, wondering if I was broken for wanting something society whispered was wrong. The constant battle between my heart and the voice in my head that said I should stay silent to protect the people I loved. Zoe listened without interrupting, her face a map of empathy as she shared pieces of her own past, the marriage that had felt safe but empty, the moments she wished she had been braver about her own desires, even if they did not match what the world expected of a rancher's wife. Love is never simple, she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had paid dearly for her lessons. Especially when it comes with the kind of courage you are showing today. But Riley, you have to be ready for what comes next. Brynn may not feel the same, or she might. And that brings its own set of challenges. Our family, our community, the whispers that start small and grow into walls. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes as the reality sank in. But her words gave me a spark of hope, the kind that made me believe maybe I was not alone in this fight. We talked for what felt like hours as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the trail, Zoe offering advice without pushing me toward any decision, just reminding me that honesty, even when it hurt, was the only path to real freedom. By the time we remounted and headed back toward the ranch house, my mind was made up. I would tell Brynn tonight when she got home from work. No more hiding, no more wondering what if. Zoe rode beside me in companionable silence, her presence a quiet promise that whatever happened she would not turn away from me. But as the stables came into view and the familiar scent of hay and horses filled the air, I could not shake the knot of dread in my stomach, the fear that my confession would not just change my life but ripple out to hurt the 2 women I cared about most in the world. The ride had started as a simple escape, but it had become the turning point where my secret love stepped into the light, and the price of that light was only beginning to reveal itself in the worried lines around Zoe's eyes as we unsaddled the horses. The ranch house lights glowed warm against the darkening sky as I pulled my truck into the driveway, my hands still shaky from the ride, and the conversation that had cracked open my entire world. Brynn was already home, her beat-up SUV parked crooked as usual, and I could see her silhouette moving through the kitchen window, probably fixing one of her famous stir-fries after a long day at the clinic. Zoe had given me a long hug before heading inside, whispering that she would give us space but would be there if things went south. My stomach twisted as I climbed the porch steps, the wooden boards creaking under my boots like a warning I chose to ignore. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head, but nothing prepared me for the real thing, the way my pulse thundered in my ears, or the way the cool evening air felt too thin to fill my lungs. Brynn greeted me with her usual bright smile, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun and flour dusting her apron from whatever she had been baking. "Hey stranger," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and home, the kind of embrace that had always made my heart skip, but now carried the weight of everything I was about to change. "How was the ride with Mom? Did she grill you about your non-existent love life again?" I forced a laugh, but it came out hollow as I followed her into the kitchen where the table was set for 2 and soft music played from the old radio in the corner. We ate first, talking about her day at the clinic, the stubborn horse she had treated, and the funny client who thought his cat was psychic, but every bite felt like sand in my mouth. Finally, as we cleared the dishes and settled on the couch with mugs of herbal tea, I could not wait any longer. Brynn, there is something I need to tell you, I said, my voice cracking on the words that had lived in silence for so long. She set her mug down, her blue eyes locking onto mine with that familiar mix of curiosity and concern, the same look she gave me when I was stressed about exams or family drama. What is it, Riley? You are scaring me a little. I took a deep breath and let it all spill out, the love I had carried, the moments that had built it, the fear of losing her if I stayed quiet, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, she felt a fraction of it too. The room went still as my words hung between us, the music fading into background noise. Brynn stared at me, her face a whirlwind of emotion, shock, confusion, and something deeper that flickered for just a second before she looked away. Riley, she started, then stopped, running a hand through her hair. I do not know what to say. This is huge. You are my best friend, my person. I never thought you saw me like that. The hurt in her voice cut deeper than any rejection could as she stood up, pacing the small living room, her movements jerky and uncertain. I have always loved you, but as a friend, as family. This changes things. I do not know if I can handle it right now. The conversation stretched into the night, filled with tears and questions, Brynn admitting she had never considered her own feelings for women, the societal pressures she felt from her conservative circle at the clinic, the fear of what her father would say if he found out. I sat there listening to her pain, knowing I had caused it, yet feeling a strange sense of liberation in finally being seen. By the time the clock struck midnight, we were both exhausted, emotionally raw, and the distance between us on the couch felt like a canyon. She did not push me away completely, but the easy affection was gone, replaced by tentative touches and long silences. I went to bed that night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my courage had been worth the crack I had put in our foundation. The next morning, Brynn left early for work with a quiet goodbye and a promise to talk more, but the air between us had shifted forever. I spent the day helping Zoe around the ranch, mucking stalls and repairing fences, the physical labor, a welcome distraction from the ache in my chest. Zoe did not press for details, just offered quiet support with coffee and a knowing nod that said she understood the cost of honesty. But as the sun set again and Brynn still had not called, the reality settled in like a heavy blanket. This confession had set wheels in motion that I could not stop, and the betrayals and choices ahead would test every ounce of strength I had left. The text from Brynn came 3 days later, short and to the point. We need to talk, family dinner at the ranch tonight, Dad will be there. My stomach dropped as I read it from my apartment in Boulder, where I had retreated after the weekend, the familiar walls suddenly feeling like a cage. I had spent those days replaying every moment of the confession, the way Brynn's face had crumpled, the questions that kept her up at night, and the slow withdrawal that made our daily texts feel forced. Zoe had checked in with supportive messages, but even she sounded strained, hinting that Brynn had confided in her, and the ripple effects were starting. I drove out to the ranch that evening, my truck kicking up dust on the long gravel road, the same path I had taken so many times, with excitement but now with dread pooling in my veins. The house was lit up warm and inviting from the outside, but as I stepped inside, the tension hit me like a wall. Brynn's father, Mark, a tall, stern man with calloused hands from years of ranch work, sat at the head of the table, his jaw set in that familiar disapproving line. Zoe busied herself in the kitchen, avoiding my eyes, while Brynn sat on the couch, twisting her hands in her lap, her usual energy dimmed. Riley, we need to discuss this, Mark said without preamble, his voice low and measured as we all gathered around the table, the smell of roast chicken doing nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. Brynn told us about your conversation. About your feelings for her. The words landed like stones, each one heavier than the last, as he laid out the family stance, the importance of tradition, the community that would not understand the potential damage to Brynn's reputation at the clinic where clients whispered about personal lives. Zoe tried to intervene gently, reminding him that love was complicated, but Mark cut her off with a sharp look, the same one that had ended their marriage years ago. You are like family, Riley, but this crosses a line. I sat there listening to the arguments, my own voice small as I defended my honesty, the right to feel what I felt without hurting anyone intentionally. Brynn stayed mostly silent, her eyes darting between us, the moral dilemma clear on her face, the pull between loyalty to her family and the budding confusion about her own heart. The dinner dragged on with accusations flying, not cruel but rooted in fear, the kind of societal prejudice that painted anything outside the norm as a threat to stability. By the time I left that night with promises to give Brynn space, the rift had widened. Mark had made it clear that continued closeness might not be welcome, and Zoe looked torn between her daughter and the young woman she had come to love like her own. The drive home blurred with tears as I grappled with the price I was paying the loss of easy family gatherings, the whispers that would soon spread through our small circle. Over the next weeks, the pressure mounted. Brynn started seeing a guy from her work, a nice safe choice that she admitted was a way to test the waters and prove to herself and others that nothing had changed. The betrayal stung deeper than I expected, watching her post photos on social media, the forced smiles that hid the turmoil we both felt. My own family caught wind of the rumors through church friends, and the calls from my mother carried disappointment and questions I could not answer without risking more rejection. I threw myself into work at the marketing firm, long hours that left me exhausted but did little to quiet the internal battle. Was I selfish for confessing or brave for living authentically? Zoe reached out one afternoon, inviting me for a private walk on the ranch trails where we talked about her own awakening after the divorce, the choices she regretted, and the strength it took to stand by what felt right, even when it cost her peace. Her support became my lifeline, but even she could not shield me from the growing isolation. The friends who distanced themselves, the looks at the grocery store that made me feel like an outsider in my own life. The drama escalated when a mutual friend leaked details to the local grapevine, turning our personal struggle into public speculation, and forcing Brynn to confront her wavering feelings in a heated phone call where she accused me of rushing her, while admitting the pull she felt toward me. The confrontation left us both raw decisions hanging in the balance, as family loyalties clashed with the awakening hearts that refused to stay silent. I lay awake that night wondering how much more we could all endure before the bonds we cherished snapped under the weight of truth and prejudice. The family gathering at the ranch 2 weeks later was supposed to be a simple birthday celebration for Zoe's sister, but it turned into the battlefield where all the unspoken tensions exploded. I had debated attending, but Zoe insisted I come as part of the family, the same way she always had, her quiet defiance against Mark's growing coldness, a reminder that not everyone was willing to let prejudice win. The backyard was filled with relatives and neighbors' laughter, and the smell of grilled burgers masking the undercurrent of unease as Brynn arrived with her new guy on her arm, the sight hitting me like a physical blow. She avoided my eyes at first, but during a quiet moment by the old oak tree, she pulled me aside, her voice urgent. "Riley, I cannot keep doing this," she whispered, the betrayal in her tone mixing with regret. "Dad keeps pushing me to move on. The clinic is buzzing with rumors and I am scared. But every time I see you I feel something I cannot ignore." The conversation escalated quickly, accusations flying about how my confession had forced her into this corner, the moral dilemma of choosing between the safe path her family demanded and the uncertain love that terrified her. Mark overheard part of it, his face reddening as he confronted us both in front of everyone, the societal judgment pouring out in harsh words about lifestyle choices and the damage it would do to the family name. Zoe stepped in, her voice firm as she defended my right to love without shame, revealing her own past struggles that shocked the relatives into silence. The betrayal cut deepest when Brynn's guy made a snide comment that spread like wildfire through the crowd, turning the party into a spectacle of whispers and sideways glances. I left early, my car speeding down the gravel road, tears blurring the road as the full cost of my honesty settled in, the lost invitations to family events, the strained calls from old friends, the way Brynn pulled away again, citing the need for time. In the days that followed, the drama intensified, my parents finally confronting me in a tearful video call, their confusion and hurt mirroring the internal conflict that kept me up at night, questioning every decision. Was I right to disrupt lives for my truth, or had I been selfish in expecting acceptance without sacrifice? Zoe became my anchor, meeting me for coffee in town where we dissected the events, her own awakening shining through as she admitted the ride that started it all had forced her to examine her role as a mother and friend. Brynn reached out sporadically, texts filled with confusion and fleeting admissions of attraction, but always followed by retreats that left me doubting if the love was mutual or just guilt. The societal pressure mounted when a local blog picked up the rumors, framing it as small-town scandal, and forcing me to face stares at work where colleagues offered pitying looks or awkward avoidance. I considered moving to Denver for a fresh start, the sacrifice of leaving the ranch and the people who had become home weighing heavily as I packed boxes in my apartment one lonely evening. A major argument with Brynn over the phone highlighted the trade-offs. She accused me of pushing too hard, while I pointed out the pain of her mixed signals, the way her choices hurt us both. Zoe mediated in a tense three-way call, her calm presence the only thing preventing total collapse, as we navigated the moral gray areas of loyalty versus authenticity. The awakening came slowly in quiet moments of reflection where I realized my identity was not a burden to hide, but a part of me worth fighting for, even if it meant losing pieces of the life I knew. Yet the losses piled up, Brynn distancing herself further to appease her father, the family rifts deepening with holiday plans cancelled, and the emotional toll showing in sleepless nights and weight loss that worried even my co-workers. Through it all, the decisions I made to stand firm came with prices I paid daily: the isolation, the guilt, the constant questioning of whether love could survive such upheaval, or if silence would have been the kinder path for everyone involved. The final confrontation happened on a rainy afternoon at the ranch when Brynn showed up unannounced at my apartment, soaked and determined, her eyes red from crying as she begged me to come talk with her and Zoe one last time. I drove through the downpour, my wipers slashing against the windshield, mirroring the chaos in my mind, the months of drama culminating in this moment, where choices would define the future. Zoe waited on the porch, her face a mix of hope and exhaustion, as we gathered in the living room, the familiar space now charged with the weight of everything we had endured. Brynn spoke first, her voice trembling as she admitted the betrayal she felt in her own hesitation, the way societal fears had made her waver, but the awakening that my confession had sparked in her too, the realization that her feelings ran deeper than friendship. We talked for hours, laying bare the internal conflicts, the family pressures that had nearly broken us, the moral dilemmas of right and wrong in a world quick to judge. Mark joined later, his presence stiff but softened by Zoe's quiet insistence that love in any form deserved a chance to breathe. The sacrifices had been real: my strained family ties, Brynn's professional worries, the lost friendships, but in that room the tenderness returned in small gestures, a hand reaching out, a shared laugh that reminded us why we fought. Brynn and I shared a quiet moment on the porch later, the rain easing as she whispered that she wanted to try not hiding anymore, the romantic connection blooming slowly in emotional conversations and supportive silences rather than grand gestures. Zoe watched with a proud smile, her own growth evident in how she advocated for us against the remaining prejudice. We made decisions that day, moving forward with caution, Brynn and I planning a small apartment in the city away from the whispers, Riley taking a new job that allowed more freedom, and Zoe promising to bridge the family gaps with patience and time. The costs remained etched in our stories, the pain we caused and endured, but the awakening brought clarity. I was not wrong for loving authentically, and neither were they for struggling to accept it. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting a rainbow over the mountains, I felt a fragile peace settle in knowing the journey had changed us all for better and worse. In the end, after all the pain and awakening, I have to ask, was confessing my love for Brynn to her mother, and then to her, the right decision, or did it destroy more lives than it freed?